I grew up in a house of 5 boys. God bless my mother, who's still with us. My father's moved on. And, my mother is in my estimation, the smartest person I know. And I talk to her regularly. She is truly somebody that I look up to, and at 83 years old, is just as sharp as ever. I've been in this business. This is my 31st year in the maritime industry. I knew nothing about the maritime industry. I grew up in California, in Northern California, and my mother was from Arizona, and so I went to Arizona State. We spent I don't know why we spent summers in Arizona. My mother would vacation in Arizona. Who does that?
It's the wrong way around.
And really, the way I came through it, it was a business fair, and this company called Sealand was at this business fair, and Sealand. I thought it was. Is that like Marine World? Is that like Sea World? What is that? And it was a containerized shipping company, and I knew nothing about it. But I was fresh out of college with a degree in accounting, and they hired me and put me in their management training program. And the only reason I took the job is because they were offering more than anybody else at that time, and I think it was $32,500 was how much they were offering for a fresh young manager. And that's how I got into the business, and I've never looked back. And it's been a wonderful experience. And I'm so grateful that at 50, I'll be 55 here in a couple weeks. At 55, I still wake up every day, and I'm excited. Every time I come down here and I see these vessels and these terminals, I'm still just as excited about it as I was when I started in the business in 1990. So I am truly grateful for my career, and truly blessed to be here. In that 30-year career, I have not experienced more meteoric growth than we have in the last 5 years here at the Port of Corpus Christi.
Yeah. It just struck me, when is your birthday, by the way? Because I turned 50 in 2 weeks from today.
You turned 50?
Turned 50 2 weeks from today on the 30th.
Young buck.
It's
April 25th.
April 25th, all right.
I am a Taurus. Does that surprise some of you?
Me too. I'm the most stubborn guy I know.
Sure.
Anyway, sorry, I'm going off script. Hey, do you want to tell the folks in the room about the functions and the operations of the Port of Corpus Christi and the economic impact of the port and the important role the port has as an economic development agency?
Well, all ports, Ian, are economic development agencies. When you look at port authorities around the country and around the world, that's what they are designed to do, is to facilitate commerce of some form or fashion. And most port authorities are landowners and land developers and landlords. And we're also a landlord port authority. There are certain operating port authorities as well. And the Port of Houston is a good example. They own the land in Barber's Cut and in Bayport that they then operate. They operate the container terminals there. The management is actually port staff, and then the labor that actually does the crane operations and the yard hustlers and the rubber tire gantry crane operations. Those are all union workers, hard-working women and men that are members of the International Longshoremen Association, which is a large national union, waterfront union. As a landowner and a land developer, we don't operate. So we will take a piece of property, we'll market it to a company who has interest. They'll usually come to us and they'll say, here's the profile of what we're looking for. We'll roll out the map. We'll show them what we have. I know you do the same with your programs as well. You find something that's suitable for their development, and then you facilitate that. And we work closely with local governments. We work closely with other industry partners. And that's really what a port authority is. Now, here in Texas, we're unique in that we only do industrial development. When you go to San Diego, or you go to Seattle, or you go to New York, those port authorities actually can do other types of developments as well. Real estate developments, things that are more congruent for tourism, or improving the livability, or making office space readily available for business. We're not in that business today. Certainly have ambition for that, because we think that we can help this community not just in the industrial growth, but certainly in some other areas as well.
Thank you. A lot of the folks, well, actually almost all of the folks in this room are economic developers of one stripe or another. And the port being an important economic asset, is there a way, or can you teach the folks in this room how they can work to capitalize and work with the port and the organization to grow their respective economies, and tell the folks here about the important partnership between the port and how you fit with the economic and work on a daily basis with the economic development folks here in the room?
Well, you know, it's great to see. I see members from different chambers. I think I saw Kingsville's here. You know, some folks from the other areas. You know, we serve a broad constituency, all the way down to the valley. We partner with the Port of Laredo, all the way up to San Antonio, all the way out to Midland. You know, even though our operations are in the 2 counties here, there is a wide constituency that is dependent upon the Port of Corpus Christi to operate and to ensure the fluidity and the safe movement of their goods through this gateway. And that's really what ports are. They're waypoints. When you talk about doing business with the port, you know, we have a multitude of relationships. It can be very complex, particularly for those of you who aren't familiar with ports. You know, I get, everybody knows what an airport is because you see it, you've been through it, you understand that. Seaports, on the other hand, people don't typically see it. But for the most part, almost everything that you use in your daily life has probably come through a seaport, either at origin, destination, or both. Whether it's your apparel, your footwear, your technology, but you don't see that. Ports are really waypoints, and in our case, we deal with customers who lease property from us. We deal with vendors because we don't, you know, if we're going to construct something, we'll go to. I see Marshall Davidson here. He gets big checks from us for doing the good work that J.M. Davidson does, and we appreciate that. We have stakeholders, and that are people who aren't necessarily doing business directly with the Port Authority, but their livelihoods are no less dependent on the Port Authority and the waterway for its, for example, line handlers and tug operators and bunker, which is the fuel for the vessel providers. There's a whole host of stakeholders whose lives and livelihoods are dependent on the Port of Corpus Christi. If you're interested in doing business with the port as a contractor, as a vendor, we're a public agency, so we have to deal with the Texas government code in terms of public procurement, the transparency, the competitive, you know, goods and services that have to be bid competitively, with exception. The engineering constituency has done a great job of lobbying the state legislature to where engineering services cannot be competitively bid. Architects are the same. You basically pre-qualify and then enter into good faith negotiations to reach a fair and reasonable price. But you know, the money that we earn stays right here in this community for the most part. And that's a good thing for any community. The interesting thing about Corpus Christi, though, is it doesn't necessarily relate itself as a port city. It doesn't really identify itself as a port city per se. You know, the port's just kind of one of other things that we talk about. Most cities, when they have a port, they really identify themselves as a port city. And that Newmark study that you did, that we helped pay for, compared us to 5 other cities, I think, of which 4 of them were port cities. So there's certainly some advantages to having a port in your city that I think we have not fully realized what those advantages could and should be.
Right. And I think that's one of those conversations. We did that target industry study together to look at, you know, the success we've had, how we build on some of those building blocks, and where we go from here. One of the things I'm realizing, and we were part of a conversation, since COVID occurred and the pandemic, there's been a lot of change in the oil and gas market. And, you know, we were part of a conversation with some folks who are saying, oh, you know, the tourism sector's all the way back and all the planes are full. But you and I, we look at different metrics. One of the metrics being like Jet A fuel. I mean, in a normal pre-COVID day, the U.S. was using about 1.2 million barrels a day of Jet A, and it dropped to about 300,000 barrels, and it's sitting a little over 600,000 barrels right now. So when people see, planes full, yet we're only using half as much jet fuel, which is made here in the port area, there's half as many flights. People are looking at the different metrics than you and I are perhaps looking at. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the oil and gas market, a lot of change in supply chains, intense competition for the barrels coming out of the Permian and Eagle Ford. Things are changing rapidly. Where do you see the market going for next couple of years and next five or so years?
Well, certainly, fossil fuels have had a challenging time for a variety of reasons, some of which are self-inflicted. The investability of the sector and the returns on investment were not very good pre-COVID. A lot of debt. We've seen a lot of bankruptcies, and so you're gonna see a wholesale change, I think, particularly in the E&P space, the exploration and production space. We primarily serve the midstream space and some of the downstream, which is the refining and the processing. Couple that with COVID, obviously, and the economic destruction associated with that, which we will come out of. And then you've got now a new administration that is very heavily focused on atmospheric decarbonization policies and initiatives. And the problem that we see right now is fossil fuels is getting vilified, fairly or unfairly, and I'm probably more in the unfairly camp, by certain political factions, and certainly there is a demographic, a young, smart, thoughtful demographic who, whether they're Republican or Democrat, has put climate change as 1, 2, or 3 on their top list of priorities. But what we've got to do is we've really got to educate we've got to educate the masses, and certainly those that are in positions of power, the appropriators, the legislators, on the value of fossil fuels. Because there is a faction that says, let's leave it in the ground. And the reality is that's not pragmatic. That's not even possible. 80% of our energy production comes from fossil fuels of some form or fashion. 95% of all things we use have hydrocarbons in them, whether it's, again, footwear, apparel, medicines, medical devices. When you look at a barrel of crude oil globally and how much is consumed in mobility, it's less than half. The other half is in petrochemical and processing and manufacturing on things that make our lives so much better, the quality of life. And there are still 2 billion people in this world that don't have a safe, steady supply of energy to heat their home and cook their food. So it's our estimation that we have not seen peak oil, even though you hear out there that there are certain folks that believe that we have seen peak oil. And peak oil consumption globally was 103 million barrels in 2019. We dropped down to low 70s in 2020 because of COVID. We're back up now about 94 million barrels. So we had a huge resurgence there. And I suspect that we will see hydrocarbons as a primary energy source for us for the next 1 to 5 decades. And that's great for the Port of Corpus Christi and certainly for the state of Texas. But that doesn't mean that we can't ignore the challenges that are out there in atmospheric decarbonization. And by the way, when Biden signed on to the Paris Accords, that immediately propelled the United States to the top of all 200 members in terms of decarbonization over the last 15 years. If you look at power gen alone, power gen in this country has decarbonized over the last 15 years by 52%. Whereas if you look at the aggregate of all the other signatories to the Paris Accords, it's actually increased by over 20% over that same period of time. And why is that? Well, we have a cheap, abundant supply of natural gas. And for the first time over the last 2 or 3 years, natural gas has surpassed coal as the primary feedstock for power gen. That did not require any regulations. What drove that was innovation in hydraulic fracturing, which gave us a great abundant supply of natural gas. And the fact that it's abundant, the economics of that make it cheaper than coal. So free market conditions actually had that positive benefit. That's the type of story that we certainly have to get out there in the market and try and get those molecules to some of our trading partners around the world. The problem right now is we've got so much gas in the Permian at such cheap levels, it's not economically viable to gather it and move it to the coast. So what we're doing now is we're talking to the federal government about that, they're providing significant tax subsidies for renewables. If you look at solar renewable per megawatt hour is $82 of subsidy. Your money, your American taxpayer dollars. Wind is $18. Hydrocarbons, 0. So if we want to look at reducing flaring and reducing some of the negative environmental impacts out in the Permian, let's get that gas incentivized to get to the coast, because once it's at the coast, we have a real need here to process it and get it overseas to our allies and trading partners around the world that can then enjoy that same decarbonization experience that we have over the last 15 years. But I bet many of you in the room didn't even know that story, and that's why we've got to continue to tell that story in a meaningful way.
Mm-hmm. One of the things we're seeing an increase in activity in the commodity sectors, plastics, steel, evidenced by the Gulf Coast Growth Ventures project. That's a $10 billion project. The Steel Dynamics project. You and I work closely up to our ears on both of those projects on a daily basis in the trenches, trying to pull those together.
I got a lot of late night calls from Rob Tully.
Oh, if you've never been yelled at by a senior Exxon executive or a SABIC executive, Jim Ellis was the one who scared me more than anything else. But he's a great guy, but he's frightening when he gets rolling. And so we've been advocating this for a lot of years. Oh, by the way, so the folks in the room, the Steel Dynamics project, that is going to be a fascinating project. We're in the steel business in a big way, a huge campus. And it's not just the Steel Dynamics piece themselves. I think at the end of the day, we'll see 10 to 12 additional companies on the campus with them, probably 3,000 workers by the time we're done.
No question about it. I think what's happening now, when we look at the next leg up of our growth trajectory, it's going to be in some of the more downstream uses of what's being produced here now. Voestalpine, for example, a great Austrian company. And it's a great arc of a story in that here's an Austrian company bringing their dollars to the U.S., using Texas gas, creating Texas jobs, importing Brazilian and Swedish iron ore at 65% purity in a process that is less than half the carbon footprint of any other HBI, hot briquette iron, which is what comes out the bottom. It basically, it is using natural gas and actually the hydrogen from the natural gas to bind to the impurities of that 65% pure iron ore pellets that come in from Sweden and Brazil. What comes out the bottom is a 93% pure piece of iron briquette, which then gets re-exported into the global markets of primarily high-end automobile and what other steel uses it is. I mean, you think of the arc of the narrative of that story. It's a great story, and now those base building blocks, that hot briquette iron, is going to really steel companies like Steel Dynamics. That was one of the reasons, amongst many others, that Steel Dynamics looked at for picking Sinton, because they have a supply of HBI, a reliable supply of HBI that they can source there. And now with Steel Dynamics going there, I understand that the company that is going to be making the Tesla frames for the trucks may be using Steel Dynamics steel so you start to see investment begets investment. And I think you'll start to see more of those downstream. And the other thing is, anybody know the MyPillow guy? He just started a Amazon for US only made goods. Let me tell you, he's going to get a lot of traction with that, because I think there is a market, an American consumer segment that will pay more for American produced products. And so you're going to see a reshoring of manufacturing away from China, away from some of these other traditional, what we've seen over the last 30 years, and back to the U.S., creating more American jobs. But they still have to be economic. And so you still have to have all the base building blocks of tools. And while China may have $3 an hour labor, we've got sub $3 Henry Hub gas, and we've got a lot of it right here coming to Corpus Christi, and we got a lot more that we can bring here. So to me, that's really the next leg up in our story of economic growth. And I'm very excited about what our future looks like and very optimistic over the next decade.
You know, we've talked about it being like those GCG. It's a horrible name, isn't it, guys? I mean, I just trip over it all the time.
Are they in the room? Did you just say that to your customer?
Thankfully, they're not. Shh! Don't tell anybody I tripped over their name.
I love the name, fellas.
So it's like landing a Target store for your shopping center. Then all of the other pieces fill in behind it, and those jobs that those folks are coming in and bringing. And don't run to the doors or go online and start applying for these jobs, but you'll see $100,000 jobs on the regular folks. By the time you get to management level, I know what some of the folks on the management and director level at Steel Dynamics are. They're like $250,000, $300,000 a year, jobs with bonuses and things like that. So, I mean, those are the folks, when people ask us about where the high paying jobs are coming from, there's hundreds of those jobs.
Yeah, and I think you'll see more of that. I think there's also an opportunity for us, again, to diversify. But, you know, one of the challenges that we see, we've got a lot of new people at the Port of Corpus Christi. We've added over 100 jobs in the last 5 years. And we're still not a big agency. We're almost 300 people. But recruiting from outside this area is hard. And it's not the job. I mean, you know, we've got a lot of great opportunities. And then they get off the airplane, first time here, they drive down the 37, they see all the refineries, kind of first impression. And then when they get to the C district here, the first thing they see is that old courthouse sitting there saying, "Welcome to Corpus Christi." And I think really what we've got to do is we've got all the great base building blocks for industrial investment here. We've got to start thinking about the people that are moving here and the livability and the quality of place to keep them here and keep our youth here and keep those young people who, you know, perhaps are going away to go to school. We want them to come back. We want them to know not only do they have great job opportunities, but this is a great place to live. I mean, we've got, you know, some great things. Look at that Great Bay and the aquarium. I saw Tom Schmidt here. He said he had a record year. We're going to see more of that. But there's going to be more that we're going to need to do from a quality of place, housing, schools, roads, downtown bars and restaurants and condos and things that, you know, that younger generation want. The younger generation, I know I have a son who he just bought a house here. He was looking for condos and he could not find one that he could afford here in town.
Sean, I'm getting Christine yelling at me already. By the way, Christine's fearsome in running a.
So you know, but he's training at NAS Corpus Christi to be a naval aviator, and he's going to go away to serve our great country. But he wants Corpus Christi to be his home, and that's why he bought his first home here, and he wants to come back. But he also wants to have kind of those accoutrements that you can get in Austin or San Antonio or Houston or Dallas. We've got to be able to do more in that area as well.
Okay, so again, I'm getting the thing. We've got one last question. So wrapping up, tell us one last surprising Strawbridge fact that people in the room might be surprised to learn, especially if it's something no one would guess from your background as the port CEO.
Okay.
This is where we get to ask him the fun questions.
You know, many of you have said, I think, you know, that I am, you know, I'm a Californian. It's easy to put a Californian in a box, right? But let me give you a little fact. I grew up in a place called Los Gatos, back when Los Gatos, the word Silicon Valley didn't exist. And believe it or not, I liked horses. And there was a stable, you know, like a where you could rent horses, and there'd be a wrangler there, and you know, you could go rent a horse for an hour with a wrangler and go on a horse ride. And I wanted to ride those horses, but I couldn't afford it, and so they gave me a job as a stall boy, shoveling horse manure.
So not much has changed then, right?
Exactly. And I ended up saving enough money doing that to buy my own horse. And believe it or not, I've been around horses and been in the outdoors. And you know, for those of you who think Californians can't ride, I beg to differ. So that's probably a fun little fact that none of you knew.
Fantastic. Well, Sean, thank you for your time this morning. Thank you for sharing this with everyone.
pleasure.
And, it's been a pleasure to have you up on stage and being able to chat like this.
It's great to see everybody out again. I know we're still not where we need to be, but it's just so great to see all of you out. And thank you for coming and listening to me.
Fantastic. I'm going to turn it over to Manny Salas.